Chapter 5. Who is Zephyr? When Xenia awoke the next morning, her eyes still stung from crying. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling as her mind replayed the strange night. Did I really hear sobbing in the trees? She thought. Or was Zeph right, and it was all my imagination? Was I just desperate to...
Was I just
desperate to prove Dad right?
Desperate to prove Dad right?
There was one thing Xenia was sure of, though. She shouldn't have left her friend behind in the forest. No matter how mean Zeph had been, Xenia needed to apologize. But when Xenia went into the sunroom, Zeph wasn't in her sleeping bag. There was no one in the bathroom. Finally, Xenia headed into the kitchen. "Good morning," Dad said from the stove. He flipped a pancake. I have a fresh stack all ready for you and Zeph. Zeph actually already went home, Xenia replied. She hoped that was true. She wanted to tell Dad about their fight, but she couldn't risk revealing they had been out in the forest. So she lied. She needed to head back right away. Xenia didn't hear from Zeph all weekend. When her friend didn't show up at school on Monday, Xenia began to worry. After school, she walked the 4 blocks to Zeph's house. She knocked on the door. An old lady answered. "You have the wrong house," said the lady. "There hasn't been a child living here for 30 years. Xenia backed away, confused. She was sure this was where Zeph lived. She hadn't actually been inside. But they had met there before heading to the trails. Has Zeph been lying this whole time? Xenia wondered. The next day, Xenia looked everywhere for her friend. She skipped school again to check Zeph's favorite hiking trails. She went back to the playground. When she saw the pretzel truck, she talked to the driver. No one had seen her. Xenia was too worried now to care about any punishments. At home, she confessed the entire story to her parents. To her surprise, they weren't angry. But Dad grew pale when she mentioned the forest. He insisted on going to the Ravens Pass police station to report Zeph missing. "What is Zephyr's last name?" the officer asked as he jotted down notes. "Have you contacted her parents?" "I've never met her parents," Xenia said. "And come to think of it, I don't know her last name." The officer stared at them. "So this girl's parents aren't worried enough to file a report. You don't know where she lives. You don't know her last name. And you haven't so much as stepped foot in that tiny patch of forest since she disappeared," he finished, making air quotes around the last word. The officer set his pen down and crossed his arms. "To be honest, I think you all are letting your imaginations run wild." Dad's face turned a bright red. "What about all those hikers who have vanished over the
who have finished over the
last year. Is that our imagination too? The officer's eyes widened.
Imagination too. The officer's eyes widened.
Wait, I knew there was something familiar about you. You're the one who's been calling to report missing tourists. You've sent us on a lot of wild goose chases, mister. But people have gone missing, Dad said. You're new here, so I don't expect you to understand. People travel through Raven's Pass all the time, the officer said. They either love it and stay or hate it and leave. We can't control that. But my friend has lived here her whole life. Xenia insisted. Then I suggest you find her parents. The officer replied. I'm sure they know exactly where she is. All the way back home, the car was silent. Xenia and her parents were each lost in their own thoughts. I think we should search the forest, Xenia finally said at dinner. I absolutely forbid it, Dad said. I don't want you anywhere near that place again. If Zeph is missing, her parents will call the police, Mom added. All we can do is hope she's fine. Xenia's stomach twisted. She pushed away from the dinner table and stomped up to her room. It bothered her that no one was taking Zeph's disappearance seriously. It bothered her so much that by midnight that night, she gave up trying to sleep. She sneaked downstairs. Zeph could be difficult, but she was the best friend Xenia had had in a long time. I can't leave my friend in the forest to face who knows what dangers, she thought. Without any hesitation, Xenia put on her boots and coat and grabbed a flashlight. She opened the door to the backyard. She faced the darkness. If no one else would help find Zeph, she would do it alone.